This can't be right. Look at these discrepancies. We need to investigate this now.
He fired 17 people without blinking, built an empire without a heart. But when he saw what his new housekeeper wore on her wrist, the billionaire who never cried couldn't breathe. Let me tell you a story about promises. About two kids who had nothing except each other, and what happened when one of them got everything he ever wanted. His name was Benjamin Carter, and the day I'm telling you about, he was sitting in his corner office, 43 floors above the city, holding a pen worth more than most people earn in a month. He was about to sign papers that would put another 1,000 employees out of work. It wasn't personal. It never was with Benjamin. It was just business. Benjamin Carter was the kind of rich that regular people can't even imagine. He owned buildings you could see from space. His watch cost more than a house. When he walked into a room, conversations stopped. Not because people liked him, but because they feared him. And Benjamin preferred it that way. Fear was predictable. Fear kept people at a distance. Fear meant control. But that morning, something happened that Benjamin Carter could not control. He was reviewing security footage from his apartment, something he did every day because trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. And that's when he saw her, the new housekeeper, working in his kitchen. Nothing unusual, just wiping down the marble countertops. Except for one thing. On her wrist, she wore a bracelet. Not silver. Not gold. Just crude copper wire twisted around itself, with 3 small blue glass beads threaded through it. A bracelet that looked like something a child might make in a craft class. A bracelet that Benjamin had made with his own bleeding fingers 22 years ago in a place he'd spent half his life trying to forget. St. Joseph's Home for Children in Detroit. That's where it started. That's where everything started. Benjamin closed his laptop. Opened it again. His hands were shaking, and Benjamin Carter's hands never shook. Not when he fired 100 people. Not when he destroyed a competitor's business. Not when he looked a grown man in the eye and told him he was worthless. But now, staring at that copper bracelet on a stranger's wrist, he felt like he was 16 years old again, standing in a basement with a girl who believed his promises. You need to understand something about Benjamin's life. He had everything, and he had nothing. Every night, he lay in a bed that cost more than most cars, wrapped in sheets softer than clouds, and he couldn't sleep. His doctor gave him pills. His therapist gave him exercises. Nothing worked. The silence in his penthouse was so complete, so absolute, that sometimes Benjamin would hold his breath just to prove he was still alive. 3 weeks before this moment, Benjamin had fired his entire household staff. All 8 of them. One of them had talked to a newspaper about his personal life, and Benjamin never found out who. So he got rid of everyone. That was his solution to most problems. Cut out the infection. Start fresh. Trust no one. His assistant, a quiet man named Kevin, brought him applications for a new housekeeper. Benjamin barely looked up from his desk. "I need someone invisible," he said. "Someone who won't talk. Won't ask questions. Won't even breathe too loud. Can you find me a ghost, Kevin?" Kevin found Rachel Hayes, 38 years old. 17 years of experience working for wealthy families all over the city. Not a single complaint on record. Not a single employer who could describe what she looked like. Perfect. Rachel arrived on a Monday morning carrying one small bag and wearing a plain gray dress. Benjamin didn't greet her. He had Kevin show her to the staff room and explain the rules. No conversation unless he spoke first. No presence in rooms he occupied. No personal belongings in common areas. She nodded once and got to work. For the first week, Benjamin forgot she existed. She moved through his apartment like smoke, cleaning things he didn't know were dirty, organizing spaces he'd forgotten about. He would leave a room messy and return to find it transformed, though he could never say exactly what had changed. The lighting seemed warmer somehow. The air smelled different, but not in a bad way. Familiar, almost comforting. His meals appeared at perfect times. Simple food that reminded him of something he couldn't name, something buried deep in his memory where he didn't let himself look. On the 9th night, Benjamin Carter slept for 7 hours straight. He woke up confused, almost angry. When was the last time that happened? His body felt strange, lighter, like someone had lifted a weight off his chest while he wasn't paying attention. He told himself it was coincidence. But it kept happening. Night after night, he slept. And during the day, he started feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. He began watching the security cameras. Not because he suspected Rachel of stealing or snooping. He watched because he wanted to understand how she'd changed his home without changing anything visible. How she'd given him sleep when nothing else could. Rachel worked with quiet efficiency. She never rushed. Never wasted a single movement. She didn't hum songs or talk to herself, or do any of the small human things that other people did when they thought no one was watching. She was exactly what he'd asked for. A ghost. Except for the bracelet. She wore it constantly. Never took it off. Not when she was washing dishes. Not when she was scrubbing floors. Not when her hands were covered in soap and water. It was clearly worthless, the kind of thing you'd find at a yard sale for 50 cents. But she protected it like it was made of diamonds. Benjamin first got a clear look at it on a Thursday afternoon. He was watching footage from earlier that morning when the camera caught the bracelet in perfect detail. The copper wire was twisted in a specific pattern, 3 loops crossing each other before curving back around. The blue glass beads were cut at odd angles, one of them chipped at the corner. He knew that pattern. He knew that chip. He had made them himself. Benjamin stood up from his desk, so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. His coffee cup fell to the floor, and he didn't even notice the spreading stain on his expensive carpet. St. Joseph's. He hadn't let himself think about that place in 20 years. He'd paid good money to erase every connection to it. Changed his name when the Thorntons adopted him. Built an entirely new identity from nothing. But now the memories came back like a flood, and Benjamin couldn't stop them. The crowded dormitory rooms that smelled like industrial cleaner and boiled vegetables. The older kids who stole food from the younger ones. The nights spent hungry and scared and small. And her. Rachel. She'd been 14 to his 16. Tiny for her age, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. The other kids picked on her constantly. She was quiet. Different. An easy target. Benjamin had protected her. Not because he was brave, but because protecting her made him feel like he mattered. Like he was worth something. They became inseparable. She saved half her bread for him when he got in trouble and missed meals. He stood between her and anyone who tried to hurt her. At night, they'd sit on the fire escape and talk about the future. About escape. About a life beyond those walls. One winter night, Benjamin found a piece of copper wire in the maintenance room and 3 shards of blue glass from a broken bottle. He spent hours twisting that wire, cutting his fingers on the sharp edges, until he had something that looked like a bracelet. He gave it to her on Christmas Eve, the only gift either of them got that year. "When I get rich," he'd said, his voice cracking with teenage emotion, "I'll come back for you. I promise. I'll marry you. Keep this bracelet to remember." She'd smiled at him, and for that one moment, Benjamin felt like the richest person in the world. 2 weeks later, the Thorntons came. They were everything Benjamin had dreamed about. Wealthy, connected, powerful. They wanted to adopt him, give him their name, pay for his education, open every door that had ever been closed in his face. There was one condition. Complete separation from your past, Mr. Thornton explained, his voice cold and businesslike. No contact with anyone from the orphanage. No mention of where you came from. You will be Benjamin Thornton, born into our family. The boy from St. Joseph's will cease to exist. Benjamin hesitated for exactly 5 seconds. Then he agreed. He didn't say goodbye to Rachel. He told himself he'd find a way to contact her later. That he'd keep his promise somehow. But the Thorntons were thorough. They moved him across the state immediately. Enrolled him in a private school. Surrounded him with new friends and new expectations. And slowly, deliberately, Benjamin allowed himself to forget. When he turned 21, he changed his last name from Thornton to Carter. The Thorntons had given him everything, but their name felt like a chain around his neck. A constant reminder that he belonged to someone else. Carter was neutral. Untraceable. Entirely his own. It was the final step in burying the boy from St. Joseph's forever. He built his fortune alone. Trusted no one. Needed no one. He told himself the past was dead. But now, staring at security footage of a woman wearing a copper bracelet with blue glass beads, Benjamin realized the past had never died. It had been waiting for him all along. He could confront her. Walk into the kitchen right now and ask if she was the girl from St. Joseph's. But that would mean admitting who he really was. That would mean facing the promise he'd broken. The person he'd abandoned. Benjamin Carter had destroyed companies. He'd bankrupted rivals. He'd looked powerful men in the eye and watched them crumble. But he could not bring himself to face one woman with a copper bracelet. So he made a different choice. He would test her. He would leave clues, small things that only someone from St. Joseph's would recognize. He would watch her reactions and gather proof. And then, only then, would he decide what to do. It wasn't courage. Benjamin knew that. It was cowardice dressed up as strategy. But it was all he could manage. The first test came 2 days later. Benjamin placed a blue glass bottle on the kitchen counter before leaving for work. It was the same shade of blue as the beads he'd used to make the bracelet. The kind of cheap glass that factories make by the millions. But to 2 orphans who had nothing, that blue glass had meant everything. He watched the footage that evening, rewinding and pausing over and over. Rachel entered the kitchen at 7 in the morning. She wiped down the counters, organized the fruit bowl, and then her hand stopped inches from the bottle. For exactly 6 seconds, she didn't move. Just stared at that bottle like it might disappear if she blinked. Then she picked it up carefully, almost tenderly, and placed it in the cabinet with the other glassware. Her face showed nothing. But those 6 seconds told Benjamin everything he needed to know. She recognized it. The second test was more specific. Benjamin found a recording of Silent Night, performed by a children's choir. The same version that St. Joseph's played every Christmas. He set it as his morning alarm, loud enough to be heard throughout the apartment. He pretended to sleep in that day, watching through the security cameras as Rachel moved through her work. When the music started, she was dusting the bookshelves in his office. Her hand slowed against the wood. Her eyes drifted toward the window, unfocused, seeing something far beyond the city skyline. She stood there for almost a minute, cloth frozen in her hand. Then she blinked, straightened her shoulders, and continued working like nothing had happened. Benjamin felt something twist in his chest. It might have been guilt. It might have been hope. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. The third test was the most dangerous. He'd kept one photograph from St. Joseph's, hidden in a safe deposit box for 20 years. It showed a group of children standing in front of the orphanage's main building, squinting against the winter sun. Benjamin was in the back row, skinny and serious. Rachel stood in the front, barely visible, her face half-turned toward the camera. He left the photograph on his desk, face up, like he'd been looking at it and forgotten to put it away. That afternoon, he came home early and watched the live feed from his bedroom. Rachel entered the office at 4:30 to empty the trash. She noticed the photograph immediately. Her whole body went still, the kind of stillness that spoke louder than any scream. She picked up the photograph with both hands, holding it like it might turn to dust. Her thumb traced across the faces of children long grown, stopping at 2 points that Benjamin knew without seeing. Him and her. She stood there for a long time. Longer than he expected. When she finally set the photograph down, she placed it exactly where she'd found it, aligned perfectly with the edge of the desk. Then she finished emptying the trash and left the room. She never mentioned it, never asked about it, never gave any sign that the photograph existed. And that restraint, that absolute commitment to remaining invisible, broke something inside Benjamin. She knew who he was. She'd probably known from the moment she took this job. Yet she said nothing, demanded nothing, expected nothing. She was still protecting him, just like she'd done when they were children. Protecting him from the confrontation he was too cowardly to start. The distance between them became unbearable. Every morning, Benjamin found reasons to be in the kitchen when Rachel arrived. He'd linger over his coffee, pretending to read the newspaper, stealing glances at her as she moved through her tasks. She acknowledged him with polite nods and nothing more. Maintained the wall between employer and employee with perfect precision. He wanted to tear that wall down. He wanted to grab her shoulders and demand answers. He wanted to fall at her feet and beg forgiveness. Instead, he asked her to refill his coffee cup and watched her walk away. Before we continue, if this story is touching your heart, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Stories about love, forgiveness, and second chances. It means the world to me and helps us grow this community. Now, let's see what Benjamin does next. The charity event had been planned for months. Benjamin hated these gatherings. The fake smiles and empty conversations. Rich people pretending to care about causes they couldn't even name. But his public relations team insisted. After the staff firings made headlines, he needed to fix his image. Billionaire Benjamin Carter hosts Evening of Hope, the invitation read. 400 guests at $6,000 a plate. All proceeds going to programs for underprivileged youth. The irony was not lost on him. He'd ordered Rachel to stay in the staff quarters during the event. The last thing he needed was a distraction, and her presence had become exactly that. But on the night of the gala, his catering manager approached him with a problem. "We're short-staffed, Mr. Carter. For servers called in sick. We need everyone available." Benjamin should have refused. Should have hired replacements or reduced the service. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Use whoever you have, including my housekeeper." He told himself it was practical. He told himself it had nothing to do with wanting to see her in his world, even for one night. Rachel appeared an hour into the event, wearing a simple black dress the catering company provided. She carried a tray of champagne glasses through the crowd, eyes down, movements efficient. No one noticed her. That was her gift. Her curse. Her survival mechanism. She could walk through a room full of people and leave no impression whatsoever. But Benjamin noticed. He tracked her across the ballroom like a compass pointing north, unable to look away for more than a few seconds at a time. That's when Victoria Ashford decided to make trouble. Victoria was old money. The kind of wealth that had been inherited so many times it felt like a birthright rather than a fortune. She'd approached Benjamin 6 months ago with a business proposal he'd rejected, and she'd been nursing that grudge ever since. She spotted Rachel passing nearby and called out, her voice sharp with champagne and cruelty. "You there? With the tray. Come here." Rachel stopped and turned, her face neutral. Victoria grabbed Rachel's wrist and held it up for her friends to see. "Ladies, look at this. The help is wearing jewelry." She laughed. "And what jewelry it is. Is this copper? Are those glass beads?" Laughter rippled through the group. Victoria yanked the bracelet off Rachel's wrist in one swift motion. "Let me do you a favor and throw this garbage away. You'll never find a husband wearing trash like this." She tossed the bracelet carelessly over her shoulder. It hit the marble floor with a small sound that somehow cut through all the noise of the gala. The copper wire bounced twice before rolling under a nearby table. Rachel dropped to her knees immediately. Her tray clattered to the ground. Champagne glasses shattered around her. She crawled toward the table, searching desperately, her composure finally broken. Victoria laughed. "Look at her. Scrambling on the floor like an animal." Benjamin was already moving. The crowd parted for him instinctively. They always did. But this time there was something in his expression that made people step back further than usual. Something dangerous they'd never seen from the composed billionaire. He walked past Victoria without acknowledging her existence. Walked past the staring guests. The whispered comments. The raised phones capturing every moment. He walked directly to where Rachel was still searching under the table, and he knelt down beside her on the cold marble floor. The bracelet had rolled against the far table leg. Benjamin picked it up carefully, feeling the familiar weight of copper and glass in his palm. 22 years, and it still felt exactly as he remembered. Rachel was staring at him, her eyes wide, her breath uneven. This close, he could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. Benjamin took her hand gently. He slid the bracelet back onto her wrist, the same wrist where he'd placed it 2 decades ago in the basement of St. Joseph's. Then he stood and turned to face Victoria Ashford. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 400 of the city's wealthiest citizens stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, watching the most powerful man in the room defend his housekeeper. "This bracelet," Benjamin said, his voice carrying across the silence, "is worth more than every diamond in this room combined. And you just insulted the woman wearing it in front of me." Victoria's face had gone pale. "Benjamin, I didn't mean. Get out of my home. And don't expect any future invitations to anything bearing my name." Victoria gathered her purse and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly in the silence. No one moved to follow her. No one moved at all. Benjamin turned back to Rachel and offered his hand to help her up. She took it hesitantly, rising from the floor with as much dignity as she could manage. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, for her ears only. "I should have stopped her sooner." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them. An acknowledgement of everything that had been left unsaid for 22 years. Then she pulled her hand away, picked up her tray, and walked toward the kitchen. The gala continued, but Benjamin barely noticed. He spent the rest of the evening going through the motions, shaking hands and making small talk, while his mind replayed that moment over and over. He had knelt for her in front of everyone. The billionaire who never showed weakness. Who never let anyone see him as anything less than invincible. He had knelt on a dirty floor to retrieve a copper bracelet worth nothing. And he would do it again in a heartbeat. Rachel was gone by morning. Benjamin found the letter on his desk, placed exactly where the photograph had been. The handwriting was careful, each letter precisely formed. Benjamin, I did not come here for money. I did not come to demand the promise you made 22 years ago. I came because after all this time, I needed to know what kind of man you had become. I needed to see if the boy who protected me in that orphanage still existed somewhere inside the billionaire everyone fears. Now I know. What you did last night was more than I ever expected. More than I had any right to hope for. You defended me when it cost you nothing, and that kindness is enough to last me the rest of my life. But I cannot stay. Not because you left me behind all those years ago. I made peace with that long before I walked through your door. You were 16 and scared, and someone offered you everything you'd ever wanted. I would have done the same thing. I cannot stay because if I do, I will become the woman who waits me before. She met his eyes. I kept the bracelet because it reminded me that I was worth bleeding for. Even if you forgot. Even if you never came back. Someone once thought I was worth that much. Benjamin felt tears sliding down his face. He didn't try to wipe them away. I never forgot, he whispered. Not one day. I just convinced myself that forgetting was easier than facing what I'd done. Rachel rose from her chair and crossed the small distance between them. She sat beside him on the couch, close enough that he could smell the familiar scent that had filled his apartment during those weeks she worked there. I don't need promises, she said quietly. I don't need bracelets or apologies or explanations. I just need to know that you're here because you want to be, not because you feel guilty. Benjamin took her hand, the one wearing the copper bracelet, and held it gently. I'm here because for 22 years, I've been building an empire to prove I was worth something. And the whole time, the only thing that ever made me feel worth anything was a girl who tore her shirt to bandage my hand. Rachel smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from her since they were teenagers on a fire escape, dreaming of escape. Then stay, she said, and we'll figure out the rest together. The seasons changed, and so did they. Rachel moved into Benjamin's apartment, but she brought her world with her. The potted plants from her place now lined the windows. The second-hand books filled his empty shelves. She still cooked their meals herself. Still wore simple clothes. Still refused to let him buy her anything she didn't need. Benjamin learned to live at her pace. He delegated more responsibilities to his team. Left the office before sunset. Spent evenings sitting with her on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on below them. On her wrist, Rachel now wore 2 bracelets. The original copper band with its blue glass beads, worn smooth by 22 years of constant wear. And beside it, a new bracelet that Benjamin had made himself. The copper wire twisted clumsily. The craftsmanship far from perfect. He'd cut his hand making it, just like the first time. Rachel had bandaged it with a strip torn from one of his expensive dress shirts, and they'd both laughed until they cried. One evening, as the sun painted the city skyline in shades of orange and gold, Rachel asked him a question. Do you regret it? The 22 years. Benjamin considered carefully before answering. I regret every day I stayed away, he said. But I don't wish I could change it. Why not? Because if I had come back when I was 18 or 25 or 30, I would still have been the coward who left. I needed all those years to become someone worthy of sitting next to you. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. You're still not worthy. Benjamin smiled. I know, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be. The copper bracelets caught the last light of the setting sun, and for a moment, they glowed like something precious. Because they were. The woman who hopes. The woman who builds her life around someone else's choices. I spent 22 years learning not to be that woman. I will not unlearn it now. The bracelet you gave me is the only proof that someone once loved me enough to make a promise. It doesn't matter that the promise was broken. It matters that it was made. Thank you for kneeling. Thank you for remembering. Please don't look for me. Rachel. Benjamin read the letter 9 times. Then he sat in his empty apartment, surrounded by everything money could buy, and felt the full weight of his own cowardice crushing him. He had known where she was for 6 years. He'd hired private investigators when his empire was secure enough to risk someone digging into his past. They'd found her easily, working as a housekeeper across town, living alone in a small apartment, still wearing the bracelet he'd made. He could have gone to her at any time. He had the resources, the power, the freedom. Nothing stopped him except his own fear. Fear that she would reject him. Fear that she would forgive him. Fear that either outcome would force him to acknowledge what he'd done. The person he'd abandoned. The promise he'd broken. So he'd done nothing. He'd watched from a distance, monitoring her life through reports and photographs, telling himself that knowing she was okay was enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. And now she was gone again. And this time it was entirely his fault. Benjamin had built his fortune on the principle that every problem had a solution. Every obstacle could be overcome. Every battle could be won with enough resources and determination. But he couldn't buy back 22 years of silence. He couldn't negotiate his way out of cowardice. He couldn't acquire the courage he'd never possessed. Rachel's letter sat on his desk, and Benjamin realized he was crying for the first time since he was 16 years old, standing in the driveway of the Thornton estate, watching the life he'd known disappear in a rearview mirror. He had everything, and he had nothing at all. For days passed. Benjamin did not go to work, did not answer calls from his assistant or respond to urgent emails from his board of directors. He sat in his apartment and read Rachel's letter until he'd memorized every word, every curve of her handwriting, every space between the lines. She'd asked him not to look for her. He'd spent 22 years not looking for her, and it had made him into a man he despised. On the 5th morning, Benjamin put on an old jacket he hadn't worn in years, left his phone on the kitchen counter, and drove across town. The address was still in his files. The same apartment she'd lived in when his investigators found her 6 years ago. A small building in a working-class neighborhood. The kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions. Benjamin parked across the street and sat in his car for nearly an hour, watching the entrance. He'd faced hostile boardrooms and cutthroat negotiations without flinching, but the thought of walking up those stairs terrified him more than anything he'd ever encountered. Finally, he forced himself out of the car. The building had no elevator. He climbed 5 flights of stairs, each step heavier than the last. When he reached her door, he stood there for a long moment, his hand raised to knock, his courage failing him. Then he thought about the copper bracelet. The photograph. The 6 seconds she'd frozen when she saw the blue glass bottle. She'd carried his memory for 22 years. The least he could do was face her. He knocked. The door opened, and Rachel stood before him in a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, the copper bracelet still on her wrist. She looked at him without surprise, as if she'd been expecting this moment since the night she left. "You found me," she said. Benjamin swallowed hard. "I always knew where you were." Something flickered in her eyes, but she didn't respond. 6 years ago, he continued, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I hired someone to find all the children from St. Joseph's. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to know what happened to everyone. But really, I was looking for you." Rachel leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "And when you found me? I did nothing." Benjamin felt the shame burning in his chest. "I knew where you lived, where you worked. I knew you still wore the bracelet. And I did nothing because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you would look at me and see what I really am. A coward who made a promise to a 14-year-old girl and then disappeared without even saying goodbye." Rachel was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Why are you here now, Benjamin?" He'd rehearsed answers to this question during the entire drive. Explanations. Justifications. Carefully constructed arguments. But standing in front of her, all those words dissolved into nothing. "Because I don't want to be a coward anymore," he said simply. "Not for one more day." Rachel studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found made her step back from the doorway. "Come in." Her apartment was small but clean, filled with second-hand furniture and potted plants that crowded every available surface. Benjamin felt oversized and out of place, his expensive jacket absurd against the modest surroundings. Rachel sat in a worn armchair and gestured for him to take the couch across from her. The distance between them felt both too close and impossibly far. "You were right to leave," Benjamin said before she could speak. "Everything in your letter was right. I had 22 years to find you, and I chose not to. I had the money, the power, the freedom. Nothing stopped me except my own fear." Rachel's expression didn't change. "And now," Benjamin continued, "now I understand something I should have understood a long time ago." He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "When I was 16, I thought leaving was the brave choice. I thought I was being smart, taking the opportunity, building a better future. But I wasn't brave. I was just scared of being poor and forgotten. So I traded everything real for everything shiny, and I've been empty ever since. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a coil of copper wire and a few blue glass beads. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me, he said, placing the bundle on the coffee table between them. I'm not here to make promises I might not keep. I'm just here to tell you that I want to try again. Not as a billionaire and a housekeeper. Just as two people who knew each other before the world told us we couldn't be together. Rachel looked at the copper wire, then back at Benjamin. What are you asking for? A chance to make another bracelet, he said. Not because the first one wasn't enough, but because I want you to have something made by the man I am now. Not just the boy I used to be. For the first time since he'd arrived, Rachel's composure cracked. Her eyes glistened, and she pressed her lips together as if holding back words that had been waiting 22 years to escape. Do you know what kept me going all those years? She asked, her voice unsteady. It wasn't the promise. I stopped believing in the promise a long time ago. Benjamin waited, afraid to breathe. The night you made that bracelet, you cut your hand on the glass. You were bleeding, and you didn't have anything to bandage it with. So I tore a strip from my shirt and wrapped it around your fingers. Rachel touched the copper bracelet on her wrist. That was when I knew you were different. You were willing to hurt yourself to give me something beautiful. No one had ever done that for me before. She met his eyes. I kept the bracelet because it reminded me that I was worth bleeding for. Even if you forgot. Even if you never came back. Someone once thought I was worth that much. Benjamin felt tears sliding down his face. He didn't try to wipe them away. I never forgot, he whispered. Not one day. I just convinced myself that forgetting was easier than facing what I'd done. Rachel rose from her chair and crossed the small distance between them. She sat beside him on the couch, close enough that he could smell the familiar scent that had filled his apartment during those weeks she worked there. I don't need promises, she said quietly. I don't need bracelets or apologies or explanations. I just need to know that you're here because you want to be, not because you feel guilty. Benjamin took her hand, the one wearing the copper bracelet, and held it gently. I'm here because for 22 years, I've been building an empire to prove I was worth something. And the whole time, the only thing that ever made me feel worth anything was a girl who tore her shirt to bandage my hand. Rachel smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from her since they were teenagers on a fire escape, dreaming of escape. Then stay, she said, and we'll figure out the rest together. The seasons changed, and so did they. Rachel moved into Benjamin's apartment, but she brought her world with her. The potted plants from her place now lined the windows. The second-hand books filled his empty shelves. She still cooked their meals herself. Still wore simple clothes. Still refused to let him buy her anything she didn't need. Benjamin learned to live at her pace. He delegated more responsibilities to his team. Left the office before sunset. Spent evenings sitting with her on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on below them. On her wrist, Rachel now wore 2 bracelets. The original copper band with its blue glass beads, worn smooth by 22 years of constant wear. And beside it, a new bracelet that Benjamin had made himself. The copper wire twisted clumsily. The craftsmanship far from perfect. He'd cut his hand making it, just like the first time. Rachel had bandaged it with a strip torn from one of his expensive dress shirts, and they'd both laughed until they cried. One evening, as the sun painted the city skyline in shades of orange and gold, Rachel asked him a question. Do you regret it? The 22 years. Benjamin considered carefully before answering. I regret every day I stayed away, he said. But I don't wish I could change it. Why not? Because if I had come back when I was 18 or 25 or 30, I would still have been the coward who left. I needed all those years to become someone worthy of sitting next to you. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. You're still not worthy. Benjamin smiled. I know, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be. The copper bracelets caught the last light of the setting sun, and for a moment, they glowed like something precious. Because they were. Some promises are born in poverty, made by children who have nothing but hope. Most of those promises break under the weight of time and circumstance. But the ones that survive, the ones that find their way back after years of silence, those are the promises that matter most. Not because they were kept, but because someone remembered. Real wealth isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts. It's measured in the people who know your worth when you have nothing. The people who wear your promises like treasures, even when you've forgotten them yourself. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't building an empire. It's kneeling on a floor to pick up a copper bracelet. It's admitting you were wrong. It's choosing love over fear, even when fear has kept you safe for 20 years. Because in the end, we're not remembered for what we built. We're remembered for who we loved and who we were brave enough to come back to. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. What did you think about Benjamin and Rachel's journey? Have you ever had to face a broken promise? Or has someone come back into your life after years of silence? Share your story below. Your comment might inspire our next story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.